Hey guys, I'm back, and this week we're talking about my favorite Disney movies, um, and we'll focus on the Disney Renaissance. So stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Um, I think I was inspired to do this episode this week because I went with Danny and a couple other friends of mine to a Disney trivia downtown at a brewery. We had a great time. Out of 25 teams, we came in top five. We were in fifth place. So shout out to us. And I hope we can do another Disney trivia because I do remember the announcer saying that he had made the questions much harder because prior to people had been complaining that the questions were too easy. And I did find the trivia to be hard. So top five, our first time out, shout out to us. But I did find it to be interesting because it was broken down into Disney Renaissance, and then I think round two was like, you know, all things Disney, and then there were, later movies, like 2010 and later, which I don't know anything about, right? I think I was off trying to do college and trying to get my degree, so I was not watching a lot of Disney movies then. And then there was a lot that had to do with Disney movie soundtracks, which we got 100% on, which I think was great. But it got me to thinking, if I had to pick my favorite Disney movies, they probably would all come from right around the Disney Renaissance era. And I think I'm going to pick five, but overall, I'm probably going to talk about all of my favorite Disney movies, and some of which came out before the Disney Renaissance. So let's get into it. Okay, so if you didn't know, the Disney Renaissance was a period from 1989 to 1999, during which the Walt Disney Feature Animation Company began producing commercially or critically successful animation films. So, or they returned to producing successful animated films. So there are 10 films that are considered part of the Disney Renaissance. And it all starts in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. Then you have The Rescuers Down Under in 1990, which is interesting because that is a sequel to The Rescuers that came out in 1977. Then you have Beauty and the Beast in 1991, Aladdin in 1992, The Lion King in 94, Pocahontas in 95, The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 96, Hercules in 97, Mulan in 98, and Tarzan wraps up the 10-film run in 1999. So those are kind of my sweet spot. I was born in 87, so these are kind of the movies that I watch repeatedly, you know. But there are certain facts and bits and pieces when I was writing up my outline for this episode that I had known, but I didn't know how everything fit together. So this is going to be an interesting run for me. So one of my favorite films, The Great Mouse Detective, which came out in 1986, sometimes is included in what they call the Renaissance, along with Oliver and Company, which has some great music in it, that came out in 1988. So those two movies being the precursors of the period, many people say that The Great Mouse Detective was the first feature film in a long time that basically put Walt Disney feature animation back in the black. So one could say it started with The Great Mouse Detective. There could be an argument there. But that's one of my favorite movies. If you haven't seen it and you have Disney Plus, definitely check it out. It's got Vincent Price as Ratigan, and I think that's one of my favorite villain performances. Disney has a lot of great villain performances and a lot of great voice acting, but that's one of my favorites. So, and he even does a singing number. It's fantastic. If you didn't know, it's based on a book series, Basil of Baker Street by Eve Titus, which I got to download this past summer from Audible. Take a listen to it. I think there are like 8 books in the series. So a lot of those books were written a while ago, if I remember correctly, and then one of them more recently. So yeah, the plot, basically follows a mouse detective. It's very Sherlockian. If you are here for the first time, then you need to know that I was a huge mystery Sherlock fan. And as I look back on my life, some things kind of set the stage for that. And this is one of those movies. So, yeah, it opened in 1986. It had, great reviews from critics, financial success, which is a sharp contrast to the movie that came out before it, which was The Black Cauldron. That did not do well. It was an underperformance. So there's an argument to be made that if The Great Mouse Detective doesn't come out and it doesn't do successfully, then we don't get anything from the Disney Renaissance. So there's that. This movie was also cool because for me, as an eventual Sherlock Holmes fan, there are a lot of things that are told Sherlock-wise, or, throwbacks to Sherlock stories over the years that I wouldn't come to recognize until later, particularly the scene in the clock tower in Big Ben. So if you're a kid and you're watching a movie independently, you don't really realize why that scene has significance or why it's even in the movie. After you're an adult and you become a Sherlock fan, you understand why that scene had to be in the movie, So from Robert Downey Jr. falling off the cliff to the final problem that Conan Doyle wrote to Basil of Baker Street and the clock tower with Ratigan. All of the stories in the same way. So yeah, it was my first introduction to it and I enjoy it to this day. So one thing I learned that happened prior to the creation and release of The Great Mouse Detective was that during the production of The Fox and the Hound in 1981, the long-term animator for Disney, Don Bluth, left the animation department and started his own rival studio, Don Bluth Productions. So he leaves, he takes 11 of Disney's animators with him, and, production of The Fox and the Hound is delayed by 6 months. The Fox and the Hound has a very distinct and heavy story, and as a kid I enjoyed it because, of course, a lot of the themes and tones were over my head, but it's not my favorite. So what happens is Don Bluth Productions puts out The Secret of Nymph in 1982, which I believe is a story that Disney rejected as too dark, right? But Don Bluth Productions becomes a major competitor in the animation industry in the 80s and 90s to Disney, right? And I mean, as I run through this list of like my favorite movies, Don Bluth has given them the business. So there were a couple of movies by Don Bluth Studios that I liked, a lot of which I didn't like, but that didn't make them any less successful. Because at the time that The Great Mouse Detective comes out, Don Bluth Studios releases An American Tail, same time in 1986, which outperforms The Great Mouse Detective and became the highest grossing animated film to that date, right? It doesn't negate the fact that The Great Mouse Detective had critical and commercial success, but as you can see, they're fighting tooth and nail, and out the gate, Don Bluth is winning, right? A lot of people I know like the movie An American Tail. I just couldn't get to it. I think that Don Bluth Studios had very heavy themes for me as a kid. Like, I want to get into a musical, I want to laugh, I want to sing, I want to dance, and be introduced to kind of little things at a time. But, An American Tail is really like a story of, immigration and trying to escape prosecution and all of these things. And that's pretty heavy for a kid's movie. It's a story that needs to be told. I couldn't get into it. And even as an adult, I still can't. But a lot of people I know love that movie. What's interesting is critics at the time also said the same thing. Like, it was way too depressing for young audiences. And maybe that could be a good thing. You never know. Kids need to be told real stories. So there is a positive side on that. But anyway, you can see it's a knockdown, drag-out fight. Don Bluth is putting out heavy-hitting movies. People love The Secret of Nymph. They love An American Tail, regardless to what critics are saying. So Disney is having to respond to that. They decide to put out Oliver and Company in 1988. It's a animated movie which is inspired by Charles Dickens' novel Oliver Twist and Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables. And it's basically about Oliver, a homeless kitten who joins a gang of dogs to survive in the streets. Very Oliver Twisty. However, it's also released on the same day as The Land Before Time. And with the number of sequels that The Land Before Time has, at the time that you're probably listening to this recording, you know what a juggernaut that was. So it's not surprising, or it shouldn't be, that it broke American Tail's record for the highest grossing animated film worldwide. But Oliver and Company didn't do badly. It outgrossed The Land Before Time in the US, which definitely made it prime for the Renaissance era. So if you're keeping track, one of my favorite movies is definitely The Great Mouse Detective, 1986. I watch it regularly, at least once a month. And I think my next favorite movie is the start of the Disney Renaissance. So we're going to jump right into The Little Mermaid, 1989, which is loosely based on the fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. And I say loosely because a lot of people know that the fairy tale itself is pretty dark. So they weren't going to adapt everything into a kid's movie here in the US for a particular reason. But I remember vividly having this movie on VHS tape. I watched it all the time. I sang all of the songs. The villain was fantastic. The music was fantastic. And I enjoyed the story. Pat Carroll as Ursula has to be the best performance of a villain I had seen up to that point. Because later on in the list, I'll tell you someone else. And I'm pretty sure you can guess it. But Pat Carroll as Ursula was fantastic. It does make me a little wary that this is one of my favorite movies as a kid that I watch religiously. And people's interpretation of it is almost never what I remember it to be. And I watched it recently with my niece. And I realized that I was right. So a lot of people like to say that this movie is about a girl who meets a man and wants to change herself. And that's if you've never watched the movie. I'm sure you'll get that. But I think they lay the foundation pretty well that Ariel is looking for something different in her life. She's been around the sea. She's seen what she needs to see. She wants to explore something that she's never had a chance to explore, which is being out of the ocean, you know. They lay the foundation pretty well. She's collecting things. She has a collection of things that she's taken from the surface, taken from people. And she's fascinated by the human world, and keeps all of these artifacts as collection pieces. And you're shown that on purpose. That's before Eric is ever introduced to her. So this was an urge of hers for the longest time. And her father, King Triton, basically says contact between mer people and humans is forbidden. So she has to do all of these things in secret. She's having to learn from Scuttle, the seagull, who I lovingly say is a bit dim-witted, but it's more than that. Because he's giving her inaccurate information about the things that she's collected and inaccurate information about people. But, Prince Eric comes along and she decides to try to get his attention and all of these things. And so the story kind of takes off from there. But her driving force had always been to leave the sea and explore humans, the human world, being on land, having legs, all of these things. So that was always in her, whether Eric was there or not, right? So she's ripe for the picking when Ursula comes along and is like, you know what? Give me your voice and I'll let you be on land, be with this man, and all of these things. And even as a kid, I used to think, how could somebody tell you to do these things? You should give away your voice. Like, how are you going to meet this man, fall in love with him, all of these things, if you're not able to talk to him? So, and then Ursula did her thing by trying to show up on land and hypnotize people and all of these things. But yeah, the foundation of the story was always that she didn't want to be a mermaid. So she was going to do everything in her power to try to... I have a theory that whether Prince Eric was there or not, she was going to sign the contract and try to be on land and do her own thing. Growing up, though, I knew that the moral of the story was, this is what happens when you don't listen to your parents. Like, things got blown out of proportion because you would not listen to the things that your father said. Don't talk to Ursula. Stay away from the surface. Don't do these things. None of what her father told her to do did she do. And then she was saying some nonsense about how she's 16 years old. She's not a child. These are the decisions that you made, sis. So one would argue that you are, in fact, the child. So, yeah. Here's an interesting tidbit that I found out that during the production of The Little Mermaid, that, people were being cautioned on the staff that since The Little Mermaid was a girls' movie, it would make less money at the box office. And people still don't understand what girls do with disposable income, but sure. Anyway, when it was released, it was third place behind Look Who's Talking and Harlem Nights, but it did beat out Don Bluth's All Dogs Go to Heaven, which is a big deal for Disney at this point because in the last couple of releases that they went up head to head with Don Bluth, they didn't win. So this was the first time that they had beaten out one of his movies going head to head at that time. So it's good to note that it earned in its initial run 64% more than Oliver and Company. So that gives you an idea how much girl power was winning in 1989. So shout out to us. And I think I read that in 2022, The Little Mermaid was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress because it was culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And I would say so. Take that, naysayers. It had its own TV show that was based on the series, which I think was a prequel, if I remember correctly. I think I watched that kind of religiously as well. It had a sequel, a direct-to-video sequel, which I also watched. And it made me feel whole. So I think I wore that tape out eventually because I watched it so much and sang all the music. My poor mother got tired of listening to me sing The Little Mermaid. There's a picture of me somewhere with my Little Mermaid hat walking around. I didn't go anywhere without my Little Mermaid hat. So that's how big of a deal it was in my house. But it was nice to know that other people thought it was a big deal too. So, great things happening there. And a lot of the music was given awards because I believe it won for Best Original Score at the Academy Awards, and Under the Sea also won for Best Original Song. And if I remember correctly, there were Grammys given to Under the Sea. So, you know, you have a hard-hitting soundtrack if you have those kind of accolades in your collection. So, big deal there. So, shout out to The Little Mermaid. Next up would be, obviously, Beauty and the Beast that came out in 1991. That, I remember being kind of the first movie we went to see in theaters, me as a kid. I have a vivid memory of seeing The Lion King right around my birthday, and I was like 7 or 8 then. But a few years before, we did go and see Beauty and the Beast, according to my mother. And in the scene where the beast roars at Belle, I apparently burst into tears. So how it's on my list now is beyond her, which she told me in the car earlier today. But Beauty and the Beast is one of my favorites. It has great music from the very beginning. And Gaston is a real villain. As an older adult woman, a man who doesn't take no for an answer and plans to ruin your life because you don't want to marry him is insidious and scary on many levels. So seeing that in Beauty and the Beast at a young age probably primed me to the real world sooner than, now that I'm looking back on it, than I thought. So, yeah. What really bothered me as a kid is that everybody in the town thought Belle was weird. Like, she's beautiful, but she's not interested in getting married to Gaston. What a weird thing. And there's some parallels to society, both then and now. So you can't really be mad. But as a kid, I used to be really annoyed that they thought she was weird for liking to read. She's always got her nose stuck in a book. Well, you know, more and more people should be reading. And like, that was her biggest faux pas in the world. Like, her father was weird. He was an inventor, but she was also weird because she liked to read. And as a kid, when I would rewatch the VHS tape over and over again to my mother's chagrin, anytime Gaston said, "It's not right for a woman to read," soon she starts getting ideas and thinking. I remember thinking, why would I ever like anyone, a guy, that tells me that I can't read? I was into that as a 7, 8-year-old. I read voraciously at anything I can get my hands on. So I was like, why would I ever be in the company of somebody who doesn't want me to read? That seems like a cardinal sin in my mind. Still does. And definitely got that from Beauty and the Beast. On the other hand, she goes to rescue her father. And this is another thing that I think people have made jokes about that other people have started taking seriously. It's like, oh, she has Stockholm Syndrome. He doesn't ever allow her to leave and all of these things. And it's interesting because when you watch the movie, she's the one that offers herself as a sacrifice for her father. He's like, okay, if that's really what you want, because, you know, he's got to have someone fall in love with him to break the curse that this mean old sorceress put on him. And I think I saw a TikTok a while back where the lady was going over how old he had to have been for this sorceress to put a curse on him. And I think we determined he was like 10. So like, yeah, no, I don't know who you are. You're knocking on my door. I'm not going to let you in. But anyway, it was a cardinal sin for him because he gets turned into a hideous beast. And the story is all supposed to start taking place before he turns 21. So he had to have been, had been in there for 10 years. as a beast. So he had to have been 10 or 11. And I'm like, lady, this is how you treat kids? Because they tell you the prince was spoiled, selfish, and unkind. And I mean, whose point of view do we have of that? You know what I mean? This woman, this random woman who's trying to come and stay the night at your house. Whatever. But yeah, Bella's the one that sacrifices herself. She doesn't have to stay in the tower. She doesn't have to stay locked up. She actually has free roam of the castle. So, not really Stockholm Syndrome if you ask me, but what do I know? And then later on, he gives her a library. And I think all of my expectations on relationships were ruined after that. If my man doesn't give me a library, does he even love me? You know? Which is in stark contrast to where she used to live because people thought she was weird for reading in the first place, to I'm going to give you a library and I'm going to try to let you read every book in the world. So there you go. But poor Gaston just won't let go. And I also found it to be interesting that Gaston is living in a town where everybody loves him. And he's hyper focused on this one girl who doesn't want to date him. Right? She, like, in scenes where he's talking to her, there are women like throwing themselves at him. He doesn't want any of these women, you know. He's plotting on how to get her father locked up in an insane asylum and all of these things. And I was like, this is a lot of work to try to force a woman who doesn't want to be with you to be with you. Which, by the way, is the real story here. Like at one point, he shows up to her house talking about how they should have 10 children, whether she wants that or not. They should all be boys, which shows you what he thinks about women. And when you look off in the background outside of her house, he didn't just put together a wedding. He shows up in tails and all of these things. How did you put together a wedding on my lawn and you hadn't even asked me to marry you? You know, he just knew that she was going to say yes. I don't know how, because she's never liked you, but okay. But one of my favorite things about this movie is Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Potts. I will never forget sitting down and watching Murder, She Wrote during the lockdown with my sister and my mother. And I had watched Beauty and the Beast VHS tapes with my siblings, or forced them to watch the movies that I wanted to watch when I was a kid, so much that when we sat down to watch Murder, She Wrote, my younger sister had been watching the episode for about 5 minutes. And of course, Angela Lansbury's character, Jessica, is talking. She turns to me out of nowhere and says, "Wait, is this Mrs. Potts?" Absolutely. Wait till she finds out that Jerry Orbach was Lumiere, because she loves Law and Order, any iteration, but mostly SVU. So she would love to hear that Jerry Orbach, somebody she watched on Law and Order, was also in Beauty and the Beast. But my favorite is David Ogden Stiers as Cogsworth. It just all fit together and it made sense. So that's probably why it was the third highest grossing movie in 1991. And it's probably also why in 1994 it became the first film adapted into a Broadway musical, which I think won a Tony Award. I'm hoping that I can get my sister to Broadway to see if we could watch Beauty and the Beast, but she won't do it with me. We saw The Lion King, but I want to see Beauty and the Beast. We'll see if I can talk her into it. But it's another movie that was chosen for preservation by the United States National Film Registry and the Library of Congress. Because, of course, it's also culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So there you go. Shout out to the girls going out, watching the movie, even if you were scared like me. Shout out to girl power. Okay, so if you're still here and you're keeping track, we're on our third movie of the Disney Renaissance and our fourth movie overall that I really enjoy. So you have The Great Mouse Detective, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. obviously the next movie is going to be Aladdin, which was based on the folktale of Aladdin from 1001 Nights. And I have to say, just getting this out of the way, that having Robin Williams perform one of your musical numbers has to be the biggest flex that y'all think it is, either of the time or now. Even more so now that Robin is gone. R.I.P. Robin Williams. But that's still my favorite part of the movie. But this had a lot of great music. It starts out with a great chase scene and a great musical number. Like right off the bat, we're like, yes, right away. As I got older, because this was one of my tapes in heavy rotation that I watched all the time at the house. So as I got older, though, I wanted to see more outtakes from the Disney Renaissance era, right? Specifically from Aladdin, because I have no idea what it would have been like to be sitting opposite of Robin Williams at the time, trying to go through lines and, not being able to get through because he's cracking jokes or doing impressions and doing different things. And I'm sure that I think I heard that they said that they have like hours and hours of footage that the animators were using to, come up with the genie's look and different things. But I would just love to see it. It would be a great treasure for us now, So that's just a thought of mine. But I do know that Scott, who was the voice of Aladdin, said it was very hard because Robin was very funny, and they had to keep redoing things and every time they redid it, Robin was ad-libbing something different, which always threw Scott off. So I can imagine. I would just love to see it. That's just me. So everybody knows, if you don't, you should watch the movie. If you have Disney Plus, definitely watch it. Watch it with your kids. But it centers around Aladdin being chosen to go get a lamp that contains a genie, which changes his world because he's a poor street urchin, or street rat, as they call him in the movie. And he's able to try to disguise himself as a wealthy prince so he can impress the Sultan of Agrabah and win the heart of Princess Jasmine. But a lot of people also have said, the real theme of this movie is change yourself to become more lovable. And I mean, yeah, this one is actually spot on, because he thinks by being different, he'll win people over. But it's when he returns to his street smarts and different things that he's able to actually change things around when Jafar takes over. I think it's also important to remember that initially when Jafar is trying to retrieve the lamp, he realizes that he can't go into the cave himself. So Aladdin is chosen and determined to be the diamond in the rough to go get the lamp, because he's, got a genuine heart and all of these things. So I think it's also important to realize that in Agrabah, Aladdin is seen as the lowest of the low. He doesn't have any money. He has to steal to eat, all of these things. So you've got this giant palace wall where they have enough money to feed everybody. They just don't. And where else would he have met Princess Jasmine otherwise, right? She had to break out of the castle because she's, unsatisfied with her sheltered life. And she's probably sheltered because nobody wants her to know how poor the people are in Agrabah, right? I mean, Aladdin wouldn't have met her otherwise. But, yeah. So, we all know how the story ends. Jafar is a pretty complex villain, because his plan is to, marry Jasmine and then kill both her and her father and take over. And I was like, I mean, do you actually need to do that? Or can you just, couldn't you just, kill them both to begin with? I don't know. It seemed like a pretty elaborate plan to have her go through being married to him and then be like, now I'm going to kill you. I don't know. It seemed like a lot to me. Seemed like a lot to be planning out and doing. But anyway, the important part was that it was released in 1992. It was a commercial success. Obviously, people praise Robin Williams' performance as the genie. His singing voice is fantastic. I have to mention that again. It was the highest grossing film of the year. So it was the first animated feature to reach like the $500 million mark. And it was the 5th highest grossing film at the time. Of course, until it's surpassed by The Lion King, which is next on the list. But Aladdin won 2 Academy Awards, as well as other accolades for its soundtrack. I mean, when you have Peabo Bryson and Regina Bell sing A Whole New World, that is a hit in and of itself. And of course, it reached number 1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. It's important to know, though, that Peabo Bryson was on the Beauty and the Beast soundtrack. So he showed up a lot for Disney. And when that man showed up, you knew you had a hit on your hand. So shout out to Peabo Bryson. And R.I.P. to Peabo Bryson. I was heartbroken when I found out that he had passed away. So, yeah. But you knew you had a hit on your hands if Peabo was there. So Aladdin had 2 direct-to-movie sequels, which I really enjoyed The Return of Jafar, but I was heartbroken that the genie's voice actor was replaced by Dan Castellaneta. Not that he did anything wrong, but I was like, where is Robin Williams? And there's a long history behind that, which involves a Pablo Picasso painting and some merchandising issues and contract issues that I'll probably go into at a later date. But anyway, there was an apology to Robin Williams, and he did return in the second sequel, Aladdin and the King of Thieves, which I have not yet watched for some reason. I really need to do that. I may do another episode where I just directly react to that movie, but I really need to see Robin Williams as the genie again. I got a TV show that I watch religiously after school on the Disney Channel. And I think that only went from 94 to 95, but I never missed it. Loved it. So I got a lot out of Aladdin. So it's definitely on my list for a particular reason. So if you're keeping up, that's The Great Mouse Detective, slightly before The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. And we're going to jump right into The Lion King. So The Lion King I went and saw on Broadway. So if a person were to ask me my favorite ever Disney movie, for many years the answer was The Lion King. And I kind of flipped back and forth between that, Beauty and the Beast, and The Great Mouse Detective. But for the longest time, it was The Lion King. And like I said, I remember vividly going to see The Lion King for my birthday. And it was a big surprise. My parents didn't want to tell, because I had been saying, like, are we going to the movies? Can we see this? You know? And my parents didn't want to tell me that we were going to the movies. They made me cover my eyes the whole ride. And I remember it was me and my baby brother. So it was a big deal for all of us to be going to the movie theater together, because we had a baby at the time. But the movie was fantastic. I will say that was probably the first time, because I wasn't a huge Land Before Time fan. That was probably the first time that I had seen a character in a kid's show or a kid's movie be killed on screen. Like the plot, the plan, and it come to fruition on screen like that. I was devastated when Mufasa died. Devastated. And there was a life lesson that people can't be trusted, even if they're blood related to you. And so, you know, this is me talking to you about the 1994 version and not the live action version where they've revamped everything. I thought it was an okay movie, the live action, but I'm specifically talking about how my life was ruined the first time I saw Scar push his brother off the off the ledge. Speaking of great villains, you have Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. You have Pat Carroll as Ursula, but Jeremy Irons as Scar is probably one of the best villains I've seen in a movie in a long time. And keep in mind, I stopped watching Disney movies a while back, so I only get to watch them if my niece and nephew pick them now, because I've seen Zootopia recently, and I'm very behind on times. But at the time, Jeremy Irons as Scar, as well as James Earl Jones as Mufasa, was, serious casting. I mean, you had Jonathan Taylor Thomas, you had Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, you also had Rowan Atkinson and Robert Guillaume and Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella. So it was like anybody that they could find, they put in this movie, and it shows, right? One of my favorite discussions that I had with my brother was that, because my brother used to love Mr. Bean, and he was like, I don't think I've ever heard this guy talk. And of course, he doesn't know the history of Rowan Atkinson and Blackadder and things like that. But, I remember I said to him, you have heard Rowan Atkinson talk. And he goes, well, when? Well, he was Zazu in The Lion King, so you have heard him talk. And my brother was blown away by that. So it's one of my favorite conversations that I keep at the back of my mind. One of my other favorite things to say about this film is that it is based on William Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I think it's also kind of based on Macbeth in some places. But, I was an English major in college, and I worked in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. And as an English major, I had to take world literature in order to get in my degree classes. Other people that were working there really put off world literature until later on. So they would come and ask me things like, I'm having to read Shakespeare. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think I've ever seen this before. And anytime they were talking about Hamlet, I would always say, you have seen this story before. One thing is, Hamlet is like very much quoted and very much reproduced. So you have seen it before, even if you don't think you have. And I remember the one girl who was a psychology major, she said, I promise you I've never seen this before. And I said to her, well, have you seen The Lion King? And she goes, yeah. I said, well, then you've seen the story before, more or less. An uncle murders his brother, who is the king, takes over being the king. That's the gist of the story, among other things that occur. And I was like, now read the story with that in mind. And she came back and she was like, oh man, that was very, very helpful. So yeah, I'll never forget. I've noticed that there has been a cropping up of people online that want to defend Scar's actions as not really that big of a deal. It's also my favorite listening to Jeremy Irons talk about how when he was at the movie premiere and Scar was killed, that people actually jumped up and cheered. And he was like, I was not prepared for that reaction. And again, I say, this was the first time that we saw somebody killed on screen, the plot to kill them, and the murder done on screen. It was such a dramatic fashion that was done. And people always say, oh, Bambi's mother was killed. Yes, but she was killed off screen. That doesn't make it any less traumatic, but I think when you're looking at Scar say, long live the king, that does it. It really does something to you in your mind. You never forget it as a 7-year-old in a movie theater, So I watched this movie religiously. I watched it religiously. So obviously it was selected for preservation by the National Film Registry and the Library of Congress. It's culturally and historically and aesthetically significant. So it was released in 94. It was the highest grossing film of 1994 and the second highest grossing film of all time after Jurassic Park, which, if you listen to my other podcasts, there's another movie I love. If you imagine me with a stack of tapes as a kid, I had a lot of these movies that I'm mentioning to you in this podcast that were targeted to kids, and then like Jurassic Park, which was, listen, people always ask me like, how often did you, I had them in a heavy rotation, and then also Jurassic Park, so I get it. I did some research and found out that The Lion King was the highest grossing film, animated, until it was replaced by Finding Nemo in 2003. So, just like Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King had a very successful Broadway adaptation. I saw it in New York. I had a great time. It had 2 direct-to-video follow-ups. The Lion King 2 is also up there, one of my favorite sequels. And I think I'll have to do another podcast about, Disney sequels that I really enjoyed. And we'll talk about that. But I really enjoyed The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Another soundtrack that was like chef's kiss. And it also had a television series that I didn't miss. So everything that was Lion King, I poured directly into my eyes and put directly into my veins. And I watched it religiously. Everybody knows about the Circle of Life. And it won all kinds of awards. 2 Academy Awards and a Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy. I mean, it is considered by many to be among the greatest animated films ever made. And they didn't, shortchange us on the casting. They didn't shortchange us on the animation or the music. So I think that's hot shit. So for the longest time, if you ask me, The Lion King was my favorite movie. And there are people out there who's like, can you give us a different Disney movie besides The Lion King? No, it's fantastic. Thank you. But depending on the day, you might get a different answer. But something from this era. And finally, that brings me to Mulan. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy Hercules, which came out in 1997. James Woods is great in the movie. And it's just great music all the way around, especially the muses. But if I had to choose a favorite of mine from this era, I'm going to go with Mulan. I'm always going to go with girl power. So, Mulan is the penultimate Renaissance film coming out in 1998. And then Tarzan brings up the rear. But for the life of me, I cannot remember if I saw this movie in theaters or not. And 1998 was, because I remember like 98 Degrees had done a song with Stevie Wonder that was on the Mulan soundtrack. I remember that vividly. And I used to watch that music video all the time when it came on. But I cannot remember for the life of me if we went and saw this movie in theaters. It doesn't really matter. Mulan was a great movie. And I think it's interesting that a lot of us did not know that this is based on a Chinese legend of a woman who dresses as a man and takes her father's place in the army to defend her country. And I just keep thinking about this notion that movies centered on girls don't do well. Well, if you're looking at most of what I just named, we know that that's not the case. Mulan, I think, ranked second behind the X-Files. And it really outgrossed both The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Hercules. So that really shows that it can run with the big dog, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. It was internationally the highest grossing family film of the year. So, pretty good. And the song Be a Man is not something that could be played around me and Danny without us bursting into song if Disney trivia is anything to take into consideration, because they were playing a lot of music and we were constantly singing. But I just remember the sequence of her getting to training camp and being a lot out of her depth, and being, Mushu is there. He's trying to talk her through it. This is how men really act. You need to get better at this or they're going to figure you out. And if they figure you out, the implication is they're going to kill you, right? And it's going to bring dishonor on your family for years, generations to come. So, I just remember her being there and not doing well. She can't keep up. She can't fight. She can't do anything. And through the course of the song, you're watching her, climb the rod and get the arrow at the top. You're watching her kick butt, fish with her bare hands. It was so motivational, and for me, really bucked the idea of gender roles and instilled a sense of feminism in me, which I'm not sure I knew was happening at the time, but I still love the fact that that's one of my main memories, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the film. Eddie Murphy as Mushu is freaking hilarious, and I think it's entertaining that when they did the live action film and there was no Mushu in it, that people were really, really hurt about that. And I was like, I don't see anything wrong with that if they're trying to make it more a closer telling to what was actually in the legend, So I didn't get a chance to watch the live action, so that's another thing on my list that I need to do. I don't have any problems with live actions. I know a lot of people do, but I don't. And to me, and I've said this in the anime community too, like if you were going to do a live action, because I think, I know they had done one for The Jungle Book, and I know that they've done one for The Lion King, and a couple for Beauty and the Beast. I think for me though, if you were going to adapt something into a live action, Mulan seems like the easier candidate than trying to make animals talk, But again, I don't know anything about movie production or anything like that. Just an opinion of a layperson. So there's that. But yeah, I also found it to be interesting that World History Encyclopedia credited Mulan with introducing the legend to a wider audience. I do remember Jet Li talking about being cast in the movie as the Emperor, and he didn't want to do it. He was talked into it by his children who wanted him to do the movie. And when he was asked why he didn't initially want to do it, he was like, this is a Chinese legend that everybody knows. Everybody grows up knowing it. So it's not like it's exciting or anything, for us. It's new for y'all. And he was right about that. So, but I'm glad he did it. And I need to, this Labor Day weekend, I have a lot of movies to watch. So I'll probably come back with that. But that's my list. The Great Mouse Detective, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and Mulan. Nobody who's a millennial like me is really shocked about that. But if I had to pick two other movies from the Disney vault, it would definitely be Robin Hood. Loved Robin Hood. I watched it all the time. There was a time that I thought I was going to marry. I was Maid Marian and I was going to marry Robin Hood. We were outlaws and we were lovers, and he was going to swoop me up like he does in the movie with Mae Marian. But that movie came out in 1973, and it's still one of my favorites. I watch it along with The Great Mouse Detective about once a month. So yeah, oodalali, golly, what a day. And I think my other favorite movie that I had in heavy rotation is The Jungle Book. And if I remember correctly, that came out in 1967, and it's based on the book of the same name by Rudyard Kipling. And, it's about a man cub. I remember when they ran the trailer for the live action version, and it was just a boy in red shorts during the Super Bowl in 2016. And my sister called me and she was like, I know what it is. It's The Jungle Book. I know it from that frame. And she was right. We had a ball watching that. So I have to get on to watching more live actions and give my thoughts on that. But if I had to talk about my absolute favorite movies, it's these 8, including Robin Hood and The Jungle Book. Just love those stories. They're close to my heart. And when they're on, I feel like a kid again. So shout out to everybody who's been listening. Let me know your favorite Disney movies. Let me know any new Disney movies that I'm missing out on, because I haven't really moved past 2008, 2009. So if you got stuff that you want me to watch or sequels that I need to watch, definitely let me know. And it's good talking to y'all, and I'll see you next time.